Hello, my name is Tom Davis and welcome back to the next instalment of the Davis Family History video series. This video will take us from Fisher's Lane in Dublin to the Transvaal in South Africa and highlight the story of my grand uncle Thomas Davis and the Royal Dublin Fusiliers. So who were the Royal Dublin Fusiliers? This is the cap badge of the Royal Dublin Fusiliers, and you may be wondering why it features a tiger and an elephant, which are clearly not native to the streets of Dublin. The reason is that the Royal Dublin Fusiliers actually originated in India. The British Army went through major reforms in 1881, and the regiment was established by merging two former regiments of the East India Company, the 102nd Royal Madras Fusiliers and the 103rd Royal Bombay Fusiliers. As the bulk of the members of both regiments were in fact Irish, they were given the new name of the Royal Dublin Fusiliers. The Madras Regiment became the 1st Battalion and the Bombay Regiment became the 2nd Battalion. It was also decided to establish 3 additional Special Reserve Battalions, the 3rd, 4th and 5th. These reserve battalions were part-time soldiers who would be called upon in times of emergency or war, but who were nonetheless fully trained so that they could slot in with regular troops at short notice. The Royal Dublin Fusiliers became the local regiment for the east of Ireland and were based at Dublin, Kildare, Wicklow and Carlow. My granduncle Thomas Davis was born on the 10th of February 1877 and was the first child of Thomas Davis and Bridget Lockheed. Thomas grew up in the tenements of Dublin, living initially at 32 Fisher's Lane and later at 4 Charles Street, with 8 brothers and 4 sisters. Life was hard in Dublin City during his youth, and it was natural that Thomas would look for ways of improving his life. The British Army were actively recruiting young men into the regular and special reserves of the British Army. The recruitment poster shows the pay rates on offer, which were attractive to young men in Dublin. So on the 5th of January 1895, at the age of 18, my granduncle Thomas Davis enlisted in the Royal Dublin Fusiliers Special Reserves. He was posted as a private in the 5th Battalion Royal Dublin Fusiliers on the 9th of April 1895 at the Curragh Camp in Kildare, near Dublin, to start his military training. Life in the reserve battalions largely consisted of training, drills, parades, army manoeuvres and ad hoc duties such as occasionally guarding buildings, etc. Thomas remained with the 5th Battalion until his discharge on the 2nd of June 1899. However, world events were to impact on Thomas's life back in Dublin and bring him to faraway places. In South Africa, relations between the Boer settlers of the Transvaal and Orange Free States and the British settlers in the Cape Colony were fragile. The 2nd Battalion Royal Dublin Fusiliers were posted to South Africa from 1897 and was comprised of 28 officers and 984 enlisted men. The unrest with the Boers came to a head on the 12th of October 1899 when the Boers declared war on the Cape Colony. On the 20th of October 1899, the 2nd Battalion Royal Dublin Fusiliers took part in the first major battle of the war, the Battle of Talana Hill, near Dundee, South Africa. However, the Royal Dublin Fusiliers suffered heavy casualties in the battle, losing many officers and men. While the battle was a tactical success, strategically it was a disaster in terms of the loss of life on the British side. As the Boer attacks increased, the British had to abandon Dundee, withdrawing to the town of Ladysmith. The Boers besieged the town on the 30th of October 1899, a siege that was to last 118 days until the 28th of February 1900. The war was not going well for the British forces, and it was clear that additional military resources were required, along with a rethink of British military tactics against the Boer army, armed with modern weapons. The 1st Battalion Royal Dublin Fusiliers were made ready and sailed from Ireland on the MS Bavarian on the 10th of November 1899. They arrived in South Africa around the 28th of November and were stationed initially at Durban. Their mission was to support the existing British forces in the relief of Ladysmith. They moved inland northwest from Durban to the town of Colenso, arriving there in early December. The Boer front line at Colenso was on a range of hills to the north of the Tugela River. The British forces were in the town of Colenso on the south bank of the river, commanded by General Sir Edward Boer. With the arrival of the additional forces of the Royal Dublin Fusiliers, a decision was made for the British forces to engage the Boers on the 15th of December 1899 in what was to become known as the Battle of Colenso. The plan was for the 1st Battalion Royal Dublin Fusiliers to lead the attack across the Tugela River. They came under heavy fire from the Boers on 3 sides and were ultimately forced to take cover. The 1st Battalion Royal Dublin Fusiliers was to lose 60% of their number in the battle. It was a crippling defeat for the British forces, an damning indictment of British military tactics and the chain of command. Meanwhile, back in Ireland, the 4th and 5th Battalion of the Royal Dublin Fusiliers were mobilised, and my granduncle Thomas Davis re-enlisted on the 17th of November 1899 for another 6-year period. He was posted as a private on the 5th of December in the 5th Battalion. The battalion was in Portsmouth on the 27th of December and then set sail for South Africa. They eventually joined the other British forces at Colenso on the 30th of January 1900. Following the arrival of the reinforcements, the Royal Dublin Fusiliers, along with other military units, reformed at Colenso and moved on the 14th of February 1900 to relieve Ladysmith. Having crossed the Tugela River by the pontoon bridges, they again encountered heavy Boer resistance, particularly at Tugela Heights on the 14th of February and Harts Hill on the 23rd of February. However, the British forces continued to move forward and captured the Boer positions. Ladysmith was eventually reached on the 28th of February 1900 and the siege of Ladysmith was lifted. This siege had lasted 118 days and taken its toll on the Ladysmith garrison, with heavy losses due to the lack of food and the outbreak of infectious diseases. The order was given for elements of the Royal Dublin Fusiliers, including the 5th Battalion, along with other regiments, to move west to Kimberley by train. News then reached the Royal Dublin Fusiliers at Kimberley that the 2 main Boer cities had fallen to British forces, Johannesburg on the 31st of May and the capital Pretoria on the 5th of June. The Boers had surrendered and thoughts naturally turned to returning home, but this was not to be for the Royal Dublin Fusiliers. The Boers began a guerrilla campaign against the British, which lasted from June 1900 until May 1902. The period was spent chasing and engaging Boer guerrilla fighters all across the Transvaal. The Transvaal terrain consisted of vast, largely flat open spaces covered in high grass and bush. This phase of the war did not have the great battles of the early parts of the war, just endless marches through hot temperatures with little food or water and the ever-present threat of surprise attack by the Boers. During this time in Transvaal, Thomas Davis was promoted to corporal on the 10th of May 1901. The Boers finally called an end to military action and the Treaty of Vereeniging was signed on the 31st of May 1902, formally ending the conflict. As the Boers were virtually defeated by late 1901, the British started to withdraw some of its forces from January 1902 for the journey home. Thomas Davis returned to Dublin from South Africa on the 25th of February 1902 with some elements of the Royal Dublin Fusiliers, where he was met with the sad news that his father, also named Thomas Davis, had died on the 28th of December 1901 of TB in Dublin at the age of 42. For his service in the Boer War, Thomas Davis was granted a war gratuity of £7 10 shillings and awarded the Queen's South Africa Medal for service 11th of October 1899 to 31st of May 1902 with 3 clasps: Cape Connolly, Orange Free State and Transvaal. He also received the King's South Africa Medal for services in 1901 and 1902. My granduncle Thomas Davis was promoted to Sergeant on the 6th of July 1903 and was discharged from the Royal Dublin Fusiliers on the 16th of November 1905, having completed his service period. Just before the creation of the Irish Free State in December 1922, the colours of the Royal Dublin Fusiliers were handed over to King George at Windsor Castle on June the 22nd, 1922, and the Royal Dublin Fusiliers were officially disbanded. Thomas Davis went on to marry Emily Lally on the 20th of January 1910 in St Michan's Church in Dublin. Thomas and Emily were to have 8 children, all born in Dublin. However, they were to tragically lose 6 of their children to illness or accident, with only 2 surviving into later life, George and Florence. George Davis featured in part 7 of my video series and spent over 3 years in a Japanese prisoner of war camp on the Boer Railway during World War II. My granduncle Thomas Davis passed away on the 23rd of February 1954 at the age of 77 and is buried in Glasnevin Cemetery in Dublin along with his wife Emily and 5 of their children. Those of you who are familiar with Dublin City will instantly recognise the entrance gate to Stephen's Green at the top of Grafton Street. What you may not know is that the gate was erected in 1907 to commemorate the Royal Dublin Fusiliers killed in the Boer War and is called the Fusiliers Arch. If you look closely, you will see that the gate is inscribed with the names of the battles which are featured in this video, such as Talana, Colenso, Harts Hill, Ladysmith and Tugela Heights. So next time you pass this gate, spare a thought for my granduncle Thomas Davis and the Royal Dublin Fusiliers. Well, that's all for now. Thank you for watching another story from my Davis family history. Goodbye for now. Slán leat.